Hello, everybody, and welcome back to LaFlamme Throwers Sports Podcast and more. And we have a very special guest for you today. But first, let me introduce my two co-hosts. We've got Michael LaFlamme, a.k.a. The Frog, and we've got Steve True North. Now, Steve, you're coming to us from someplace very special. Where are you at now, Steve?
I am. So thanks, Kitch. Hello, everybody. I'm actually dialing in from our LaFlamme Throwers corporate headquarters today. We've gotten a lot of work in with the IT team. As of today, we officially have a Twitter handle. We officially have an Instagram account, and we're going to have Facebook shortly. So while we want you to subscribe to our channel, we don't want you to forget about us on Twitter, on Instagram, on all forms of social media. So while we are socially distanced, as you can tell behind me, apologize for any poor lighting. We are as connected as ever. So we're expanding, and we, again, are now on Twitter. We're now on Instagram. We're going to keep on working.
Fantastic. And Steve, would you introduce our special guest and tell us about the team that he's going to talk about?
You bet. Thanks, Kit. So it's an honor and a privilege, partially because of the respect and friendship that I happen to have for this man, but also because we often hear that human beings utilize about 10% of their brain power. I will say having this gentleman on our podcast is utilizing about 10% of his power in this subject category. I think everybody listening could probably quit their 8 to 5s and head to Vegas with this guy and put some bets down on the 2020 season. This is one of the most educated and accurate NFL prognosticators I've ever met in my life. And I'm fortunate to call him a friend as well. So I'd love to introduce Dr. Martin Wilkes. Solid friend for 10 years, a respected practicing retina surgeon, and diehard Atlanta sports fan. That's certainly including the Atlanta Falcons. So, Martin, we want to thank you for joining us. And we're looking forward to get the rundown on the Falcons and how you think they're going to perform in the NFC South.
Well. Thank you, Steve. I'm humbled by your words. And gentlemen, greetings. I'm happy to be here.
So, Martin, I'll take the first question here. Why Atlanta Falcons? You know, I saw that you went to college in Virginia. You were born in Boston. You trained in Cincinnati some. How did you end up being a Falcons fan?
It's actually more simple than it sounds. The cut and dried answer is I'm just a homer. I'm from Atlanta. I was raised in Atlanta from when I was 2 to my college years in my late teens. And so I grew up in the culture of the Atlanta Braves, and obviously the lesser culture of the Falcons and the Atlanta Hawks. But still, I was loyal to all things Atlanta. And so for better or for worse, I've ridden with the Atlanta Falcons.
So, Martin, I'd love to jump in with a question. I don't want to get off topic, but you mentioned that you grew up you mentioned the Braves first. Does that happen to have anything to do with the fact that in your formative years you were able to watch Maddox, Glavine, Smoltz and company during the Braves dynasty, or where does that come from?
It absolutely does. Very intuitive there. That has all to do with it. Watching that pitching rotation year after year, watching multiple stars come in and take us to the playoffs year after year. I mean, basically winning the division being a foregone conclusion at the start of the season was something that spoiled me and really sort of indoctrinated the Braves culture to me year after year. In grade school, we'd get days out of school for when we got to the playoffs and the World Series. So, I mean, Braves were synonymous with success and, you know, just the fun and all sorts of joys of childhood.
Well, I can tell you that Cincinnati was happy to lend you its native son, David Justice, to help with that run. David is from a Covington Latin High School graduate and a son of the Queen City, and he and Halle Berry actually lived in Cincinnati when they were married. So I'd like to think since he can take some kind of claim to that Braves success, but I digress.
I'll be forever grateful. Thank you.
So, Martin, if you had to choose between the Braves and the Falcons, I know it's like choosing between your children, but if you had to choose one or the other, Braves or Falcons, who would you say you root for more?
This is a football production, so I'd have to say the Falcons just because I've had a lot of those cherished memories with the Braves already. So if I could tuck that away with me and keep that with me for the rest of my life, it still would keep me warm and fuzzy inside. I'm still yearning for that with the Falcons. So I'd have to roll with the Falcons on that question. It's very close, though.
All right, Martin, I got to jump in because they're egging me on because being a Clevelander and a Cleveland sports fan, they're just rubbing it in about the whole Atlanta Braves dynasty. So let's knock us all down a peg. Why don't you tell us your worst Falcons memory?
Worst Falcons memory, that's very easy because it's so fresh. 2017, one fateful day in February, first Sunday evening, we were in the position to become world champions. After 3 excellent quarters of football, I was riding high. We made plans for certain adult establishments half an hour later that were thwarted by Tom Brady and company. And that still hurts. The wound is still fresh. I will probably never get over that until we win a championship completely.
All right, so I'm happy to now re-ask, what about your best memory? So I feel like we're kindred spirits. How the Falcons are to you is how basically every Cleveland franchise minus LeBron is to me.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the best Falcons memory.
The best Falcons memory is actually immediately akin to the worst, which was the halftime of the Super Bowl, where it looked like we essentially had it in the bag. We played incredible half of football, even into the third quarter. And it just seemed like an absolute sure thing that just melted away over the course of the next hour. But I was obnoxious. I was not sober. It was a great feeling, but it just didn't pan out.
So, Martin, who is your all-time favorite Falcons player?
For me, and I had to give this some thought because I really do like Julio Jones, but number one for me, and it could be a function of just being young and sort of just in adoration of this person, but it has to go to Dion, primetime, Neon Dion. My favorite player. He was obviously a Hall of Famer now, drafted in 1989, dual sport athlete. At the time, he could do absolutely no wrong. I mean, it was unprecedented for players to be as good as he was in just football, and then let alone another sport, playing more than one major league sport in the same day, hitting a home run, scoring a touchdown in the same day. Those are things we'll never see again. And so my favorite Falcons athlete actually has to be Deion Sanders.
So, Martin, let me piggyback on that and ask you the opposite. Is there any specific nemesis? And I'm not just talking overall team, although if there's not an individual, feel free to default to team, but any specific rival that you remember despising growing up. You can't say Tom Brady. I know what he did to you in the Super Bowl, but we're talking on a regular basis. Who did you like the least on another team, or which team did you like the least growing up supporting the Falcons?
This is pretty much universal knee-jerk response for any Falcons fan. It will forever and always be the New Orleans Saints organization, whether it's Drew Brees, whether it's Sean Payton's smug face. I cannot stand New Orleans. I cannot stand the city of New Orleans. I could go further, but just to keep things clean, it's absolutely all New Orleans Saints. I've relished the past couple of years with that blown pass interference call. Even if it was childish or immature of me, that was very rewarding, as well as the year with the Minnesota Miracle. That was incredible TV. That was one of the best moments of TV I ever watched. Just to watch the Saints get a knife twisted was worth it.
All right, so let's now go to something happier.
Please.
So you're on a awesome. You're on a draft, basically tone podcast, but the family is going to extend very far over time. What is your favorite draft memory as a Falcons fan?
Favorite draft memory has to be 2011 when we basically sold the farm to get Julio Jones. Wide receiver was in need at the time, and we really did a whole lot to acquire that player. As you guys probably remember, we gave up 5 picks to your Cleveland Browns, 3 that year and 2 the following year. And I kind of just like the gumption we showed for really going after what we wanted, even though it was ill-advised. We had a need. We honed in on it. We saw it, and we accomplished that goal. And Julio Jones ended up panning out as one of the great wide receivers of our generation. I did go back and actually sort of peruse over that year's wide receiver class. And prior to Julio, it was A.J. Green. But if you look after A.J. Green, man, it's just a ton of guys, really. I mean, there's Randall Cobb and Torrey Smith that stick out. But after Julio Jones, I mean, it drops off by several tiers. So in retrospect, that's a draft pick that's, I think, held up as far as value.
Now, Martin, do you remember who those 5 players were that you guys ended up trading away for Julio Jones? Because I don't. Frog, do you know?
So I know they took the Falcons pick in the first round that year, which was in the 20s, because the Falcons were a good team. And when I say the phrase "throwing your nuts out there," that was a "throwing your nuts out there" moment by Thomas Dimitroff. And then the first rounder the next year, and then the rest of it is fuzzy, but it was a king's ransom. Like, a lot of people follow this Dallas Cowboys draft trade chart, and then over time, people have kind of created different formulas for what is the right amount. He gave more than what was on the chart, to where he dared the Browns to basically, here's more than what is on the chart. You got to say yes, because you look like a fool if you said no, because you're picking at 6. I think it was 6.
Mm-hmm.
You need to rebuild your team. Yeah, you need to rebuild your team. I believe it was Mangini at the time that looked at parts as being exposable, like just try to build a good team. And the Browns ended up taking a good player who's now a Falcon. Or no, he was the next year pick, I believe, in your center, Mac. But I mean, like, literally that trade, the Falcons got a Hall of Famer and the Browns got a bunch of good football players. And nobody remembers all that capital now. It worked out.
So I'll come back to you, Martin, with this question, and I'll look that up and put up on the screen here exactly who they ended up trading for. What was, as a Falcons fan, biggest draft disappointment?
There's two answers for that. One is more recent. It was the draft after the year after our Super Bowl, after our hangover year. And there's a saying that you shouldn't wait until you need a QB before you draft one. And Matt Ryan, the verdict was still out. He had obviously the MVP season in the 2016-17 season. The following year was quite underwhelming. We get to the 2018 draft, where we ended up taking Calvin Ridley somewhere in the late teens. But I was really, really hungry for Lamar Jackson that year. And the story kind of unfolded, and we've seen what's happened there. But I really wanted someone to be able to light a fire under Matt Ryan to help him still come with that intensity that he had his Super Bowl year, because he didn't return that value in the following year. And so Lamar Jackson is somebody I thought would have been great to even just work into the offense in some sort of creative ways, to where they even both could potentially be on the field. That unfortunately didn't happen, but I really wish he was a part of our organization, because he would have been available. We would have missed Calvin Ridley, but we could have got someone else, I think, later that could have returned a similar value.
And what about
the second?
You said, Martin, you had 2 of them?
Yes, excuse me. The other one goes way back to 1992, when we drafted somebody you might have heard of, Brett Favre, and we let him go. We gave him, obviously, to the Cheeseheads in Green Bay, and it would be a nice pop quiz to ask you who we acquired in that trade, but I'll just go ahead and tell you just to keep this short. But it's a jabroni, a guy who was literally in an abyss of obscurity, who ran for 363 yards in his career over the course of 3 years. All of those yards were in his rookie year. That's what we got from Brett Favre. That's one that will always dog me for the rest of my life.
So, Martin, I've got a question for you. Talking about Brett Favre, and let's transition to other quarterbacks. And I'm not trying to tear any scabs off from the Super Bowl that you've already lost your darkest moment. But how do you feel as a Falcons fan? You've had a lot of big news in the NFC South with quarterbacks. You're not going to face Cam Newton anymore, right? Teddy Bridgewater is going to be someone you see now. You also got another quarterback that some people may have heard of, Tom Brady, that's going to be suiting up for Tampa Bay. Are you relishing this? Is this something you're looking at, like a chance for payback 2 times a year? Are you a little nervous about him succeeding? How do you feel about Tom Brady being in your division?
I think an answer, like you just said, a little nervous or perhaps even cautiously optimistic applies here. Teddy Bridgewater doesn't really scare me. I think that he's a very capable quarterback that brings a lot to the table as far as accuracy. As far as downfield passing, we'll see. He has some more weapons with Robbie Anderson, and then he already had Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore. Christian McCaffrey goes without saying. So they've got a very talented roster. We'll see if they gel, but I think that our roster offensively stacks up well to them. New Orleans is good every year. Drew Brees, there's some rumblings about perhaps declining arm strength. They obviously brought in Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill. So, you know, I mean, they'll probably be good as they always are. Sean Payton is an excellent offensive mind, but I wouldn't say that I don't think we compare up to them. last but not least, Tom Brady, I think most people would agree, the best quarterback we've seen, at least of our generation. They are going to be a problem. I do wish that they left us out of this as far as acquiring Gronkowski and everything that they've done. That's going to be a source of stress probably for the rest of their tenure down there. But Tom Brady, I do think the verdict's out as far as, how he does in that system. Is that going to be something that immediately translates to offensive productivity? Can he keep the same level of numbers that Jameis was able to give them in the past few years? That's something that we actually haven't seen. When quarterbacks fall, they fall sharply. And so that's something that, even though it's unprecedented how productive he's been this late in his career, it'll be interesting to see what happens down there in this new regime.
Well, I'm excited to get you back to talking about your squad, the Falcons. Two-part question, because you follow the draft and you're an avid fan and you know your team. What needs did you see coming into the draft? And then who'd you want them to take that was realistic?
Sure. Those needs were obviously defense, and that unfortunately has been a theme for really the past decade. There were rumblings pre-draft of us perhaps taking Chase Young with the deal with the Redskins. Obviously, they would have been pretty foolish to do that, and we ended up staying put. But that was unfortunately something I latched onto to the point where I got excited about it possibly happening, and it didn't. Javon Kinlaw, who ended up going to San Francisco. I thought that would have been a nice acquisition for our defense. That didn't pan out either. But going into the draft, we had needs in the secondary, primarily a cornerback and pass rush. And we did answer those with who was available. We got Terrell, a cornerback out of Clemson, who apparently is pretty good, not necessarily a perfect player, but has good instincts on the field. We'll see if that translates. Clemson people recently drafted that come to mind, like Cleveland Farrell that went to the Raiders last year. It's too early to say he's a bust, but he's certainly underwhelmed. And in my opinion, I don't really have the highest regard for how Clemson defensive folks translate to the NFL, but we'll see. We did also get Marlon Davidson from Auburn, who should apply a nice boost to our interior pass rush with Grady Jarrett. And so I'm hoping that that's something that also translates now. That in conjunction with Dante Fowler that we got, who will be a defensive end, will hopefully make us a little bit more formidable and give, like Steve was saying, some of these NFC quarterbacks a little, make them a little bit less comfortable in the pocket.
Well, because you're very in tune fan and we're going to have you around a lot, and I'm excited about that. One thing I got to root for is if the Falcons fall off, maybe you can get yourself an Atlanta quarterback. You'll have a choice of two next year.
Right.
If you fall off far enough.
Good point. There is always a silver lining, and you're right. I mean, I try to be positive in any situation, so I'm with you there.
Frog alludes to something very interesting. Matt Ryan, how many more years, Martin, do you think Matt Ryan has to be a top tier or upper echelon quarterback in the NFL?
That's a great question, because even amongst my ilk, amongst Falcons fans, our stance on Matt Ryan is very polarizing. Some people feel like, he's our almost Messiah, savior-like figure. Other people feel like he's holding us back and we could be better under with a different person under center. I'm kind of in the middle in that, he has a very stable ceiling that can win a championship, but he has also displayed some inconsistency that I think you objectively have to find worrisome. I'd say on the low end, he's maybe got 2 years. On the long end, maybe 5. I do wish we had someone to compete with him that most people would look as a formidable opponent in camp. I can't really say that we have that now. But they have a plan, and hopefully this is something that materializes as far as getting to the playoffs and winning that championship.
When you were sitting there at 16, CeeDee Lamb was on the board. Was there any part of you that looked at that CeeDee Lamb and said, man, what a wide receiving core we would have? I know we need defense, but gosh, take the best player available.
The answer is yes. CeeDee Lamb is a shiny new toy that I think any team would be lucky to have. I really, just as an aside, thought it was pretty funny how Jerry Jones took them, literally snatched them out of the clutches of the Eagles, but that's another story. But I think any team would be lucky to have CeeDee Lamb. I mean, he's an absolute beast. He's a contortionist. Just his highlight reel is unbelievable to watch. But at the same time, being responsible and addressing our defensive needs is something that needed to be done. And they were disciplined enough to do that. So I do respect their decision.
Well, I'm excited to have a Falcons fan on here. So I've actually been to a Falcons game when I was with the Bills. I chose to travel to a game. I have a friend, actually, she's still working for the Falcons, and it was a sold-out stadium, and that was the year that was underwhelming because the Falcons, I believe, went 8-8 that year, and they had nothing to play for, no playoffs, and the game was still sold out. And it is like an underrated fan base that I'm excited. If good things happen, we'll get to live vicariously through you. And then also, if it goes bad, I want it to go real bad because I'd love to see you get an Atlanta quarterback.
I appreciate that, Frog. Thank you.
So, Martin, going into next season, you've got Dante Fowler, you've got Todd Gurley if his knees are working, you've got A.J. Terrell and Davidson. Give us an estimate. What do you think this team is? Are they 9-7? Are they 10-6? It's a tougher division with Brady and Tampa. How do you think the season's going to play out?
I kind of don't really see a middle ground, and that's kind of a function of just how I've seen things under Dan Quinn's regime. He's obviously a defensive-minded coach out of Seattle that's very talented, but his scheme hasn't quite translated in the way I think a lot of us had kind of hoped prior to his acquisition. He kind of likes speed, and he likes to keep a lot of substitution and keep people fresh. And it doesn't necessarily have superstars, but a lot of people that are able to work as a unit, the secondary supporting the front and vice versa. And so if our defense is solid enough to where people aren't scoring 40 points on us a week, I think that we can actually be really formidable. So I don't really necessarily predict 8-8 or 7-9 even. I think we'll probably end up being a 6-win team or maybe a 10 or 11-win team. I'm hoping it ends up panning out as 11-5 or so, but it's all yet to be seen. We'll see how these people materialize and develop.
Well, awesome, Martin. Listen, it has been great having you on for Frog, for North, and myself. I want to thank you, and we will have you back on again this summer for some training camp and some fall predictions. Once again, from the LaFlamme Throwers, thank you, Martin Wilkes, and have a great day. Stay safe.